So, welcome everyone to the Q&A session for the Gateways to Blue Skies 2022 competition. My name's Janice Miller, and I'm on the National Institute of Aerospace Management team for this competition. And you also see here Stephen Holtz, who is on the University Innovation Project, who is sponsoring this on behalf of NASA. So we wanted to have this session so that everyone can have a chance to pose some questions and get their answers ahead of the March 3rd deadline for the proposals and infographics and videos. And like I said, we will be recording this, and I'd like for you guys to mute your mics if you haven't already. We will be introducing the program and Stephen and our stakeholders at the University Innovation Project, as well as at NIA, National Institute of Aerospace. And we'll be giving a little bit of really high-level context overview because we did touch on this in the Q&A from November. So if you need anything a little bit more in depth, feel free to go back and revisit that recording. Stephen will give a few technical remarks about the competition, and Stacy and I will make a few programmatic remarks, and then we'll open it to the open call opportunity for everyone to ask their questions. This is our team at National Institute of Aerospace, led by Shelley Spears and Stacy Dees, who's on this call. She just turned on her video so you can see her. Our team manages the higher education competitions on behalf of NASA, including the Gateways to Blue Skies competition. We will facilitate answers to questions posed at the blueskies@nianet.org email address in case you have any additional questions beyond this particular forum. We're happy to answer those as we lead up to the due date. We'll communicate with the challenge participants as we head into our selections process. And of course, if your team is selected as a finalist, you'll see our faces at the forum in June. As I said, this is a competition that is sponsored by NASA, the Aeronautics Research Mission Directorate, through the University Innovation Project. And Stephen Holtz is here to answer questions that you all might have for this competition. He works with Kaushik Datta, who is the project manager for the University Innovation Project, and Mina Capuccio, who is the deputy project manager for the University Innovation Project. And like I said, Stephen will be answering questions. If you have any interest in some of the other competitions and other programs that University Innovation Project has, definitely take a look online and see what else is out there. So I'm going to turn this over to Stephen to make a few technical remarks. Stephen, if you don't mind making some, very high level, like I said, overview points about the competition, just to kind of give everyone a little bit of context about what we're doing.
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, so some of you may already know since you're working diligently on your submissions, but the main purpose for our Blue Skies competition, some of the reason that we decided to host it is that we've seen a big push in recent times for climate-friendly aviation technologies, especially from the administration in the White House and through our programs here at NASA. So we decided that some of the most important engineers that will be working on those problems in the 2050s timeframe will be you all who are in school right now, learning your engineering basics and your basic aerospace classes and all of those things. So we decided, hey, well, how do we get people interested in climate-friendly aviation and start them on the research path for those technologies and topics? And we decided to put together this competition where we have you kind of look at the aviation landscape of the future, looking at today's research and kind of predicting where will we be during the 2050s timeframe, and how do those climate-friendly aviation technologies that we have based on the research that you're doing, how will that affect the airports that we need to have in the future as well? We decided to make it a little different from some of the typical competitions. The paper is not quite as long as some others, but we also have some other interesting components such as the infographic. And I think we have a really good team of judges from not only NASA, but industry that will be helping judge your submissions and hopefully get to see your wonderful presentations for the 8 finalist groups at the Blue Skies Forum.
Great, thank you, Stephen. And yes, we're really excited about this all new competition, focusing on the climate-friendly aviation technologies of tomorrow. So I personally can't wait to see what comes in on March 3rd. Again, like I said, we touched on some of these items before for our program, but I wanted to make a couple reminders for those who might be new on the call, or for those who might need the reminders who joined us in November. We want everyone, some teams have submitted an NOI without a faculty advisor. And we wanted to remind everyone that when the technical paper and when the infographic and when the video come in, please make sure that you do have a faculty advisor listed on your submission. Another thing that's very important is to make sure that you read the competition guidelines in full. They definitely outline everything you're going to need to know about submitting and making sure that everything is all squared away for the judges to review. And of course, this is the one and only chance for our judges to see your concept design. So make sure that it is the very best foot forward that you all can present. And then, of course, one new thing that we wanted to highlight for everybody, there were several questions in the last Q&A about the NASA internships. And Stephen, feel free to join in and make some comments on this if you'd like. But we wanted to make sure that everyone knew that the winning team members, those who come out at the top of the forum, those will have an opportunity to participate in a NASA internship. Those will be taking place during 3 semesters starting in fall of 2022. So it'll be fall 2022, spring 2023, and summer 2023. We will send information to our finalist teams following the April 7th selection date. And those teams will have instructions for applying to those Blue Skies internships. And once those winners are announced, they'll receive additional instruction from us and from University Innovation Project to be placed into an internship that suits their schedule and suits their interests and kind of carries forward some of the research that they're interested in. So we just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of that. Stephen, did you want to make any comments on that?
Sure, yeah. I think the variety of semesters you see there is really because we want to work with the students to find an opportunity during a time frame that works for you and your academic schedule. Also, I wanted to jump in on the item where Janice said to make sure you read the competition guidelines, and I just can't stress that enough. We definitely try to be thorough in outlining the types of things we do and don't want you to put in your submissions, right? And we don't want you wasting some of the valuable page space on some of the items we aren't looking to see. So definitely check that out. But it also contains exactly how we will be judging your various portions of the competition, whether it's your paper or your infographic, or even the presentations for the finalists. So definitely check that out so you know what we're looking for and how we'll be judging those items.
Great. So, like I said before, we do have a recording and our summary document from November 9th. We'll be doing the same thing for this particular session, so everyone has a chance to take a look at, revisit some of the answers and make sure that everyone is completely clear on what needs to be submitted. And, if there's any other questions, of course, reach out to us. And now, on to the questions. I see that Stacy has put some instructions in the chat for how to raise your hand to ask a question. And then, of course, the chat is available for anyone to post a question, and I will take a look at those. And Stephen has that chat up as well, so we can make sure that we answer those things. And while everyone's thinking, we do have one question that came in between the two Q&As. And so, Stephen, that question is regarding any changes that teams might want to make after submitting their proposed project. So if we get picked as a finalist, are we allowed to make changes to our proposal and infographic after March? Will we lose points? And how should we send any changes to the judges?
Yeah, thank you. And we did discuss this question in depth on the team, and we decided that just as it says in the rules, the submissions aren't changed after the original submission deadline. We will be judging the paper and the infographic as submitted to us. And if you are one of the finalists, after you make your presentation on the information presented in your technical paper, you are welcome to talk about updates that you have thought about or developed, or show us an updated infographic. However, if you do take a look at how all of those things are evaluated score-wise, we are not evaluating the those additional technical updates or infographic updates for the presentation for the finalists. You can see that we are evaluating the quality of your presentation, the consistency, and how well you answer our questions.
Great, thank you. Now, we do have another question, Stephen, about that I can kind of chime in on, and you can feel free to chime in on as well. But obviously COVID is looming over our heads still, and there are restrictions and guidelines that still exist, both regionally and nationally, and through NASA. So the question is, if COVID persists into the spring and summer, will we still have an in-person forum? And the answer from our team is that it's somewhat TBD. We hope to have an in-person forum if the NASA guidance and stakeholder comfortability allows us to do so, but there's a lot of moving pieces to arrive at that decision. One of the things that we wanted to highlight for our teams is that we have added a few questions to our proposal submission form. You'll find those at the bottom. They have absolutely no stake in your scoring for your proposal and your infographic and your video. They are simply questions that will answers to which will help us decide and help Stephen's team and help NIA's team and our judging panel decide how to go ahead and proceed with hosting an in-person forum. So we expect to make a determination to finalists upon selection, and everyone should know that by that early to mid-April timeframe.
Thanks, Janice. We have a question from Aaron Burns. Aaron, would you unmute yourself and ask your question? Feel free to pop your camera on as well if you'd like.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon. I just had a question on the guidelines. In the guidelines, it talks about discussing technology readiness levels. I'm curious if you intended that to be the TRL like today or in 2050, or maybe sometime in between.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, and if I recall correctly, I do think we talk about possibly mentioning where the technologies are now, and maybe where you expect them to be in 2050, right? And some of that comes into your background research on the current aviation landscape and how you think that will evolve by 2050. Different people might find different things in their research about the current technology readiness level of different aviation technologies, and where they will be by that time frame. So I think it's really up to the group in your research on where you predict that will be in the target time frame, since some technologies may or may not be ready by then and kind of into the airport implementation phase.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Good question, Aaron. And I received a question from Maxwell asking, how comprehensive should our NOI be? Should the concept include all of the planned components we would like to include, or should it hone in on one specifically?
Yeah, and I guess that is a good question. I can't speak for the NOI. The NOI doesn't, have as much information as the whole paper. But the paper itself should be a very high level, right? You only have 5 to 7 pages, and there's a lot of stuff to cover. So definitely take a high level systems approach to talking about the technologies and what kind of requirements they might need for the airport, or what kind of changes they might need design wise. That way you can talk about all of the technologies that you feel are relevant and important to mention in that the 5 to 7 pages. So definitely you don't want to go too far in depth about one technology, or you might not have time to talk about a lot of the various important technologies you still need to talk about.
Thanks for that, Stephen. And I think I'm going to back up and just kind of address the NOI specific question a little more in depth. The idea for us kind of wanting to know what the concept is at the NOI stage was mostly just to make sure that you're on the right track, so that if you had proposed something that was completely outside of the scope of the competition, we'd have the opportunity to reach out to you and redirect you before you started investing a lot of time in writing out that proposal. So a very high level overview of some of the things that you might want to touch on is all that's really needed at the NOI. Just a quick summary.
That's great. And to tack on what Stacy said, it is helpful for us to have the NOI sooner than later in case there are any of those changes or updates that we might want to pass on to participants. So if you haven't submitted an NOI, it's encouraged. And like Stephen said, it's much more bare bones than the proposal. So feel free to get those in sooner than later.
And the NOIs are non-binding, so we're not holding you to that. If you decide later that you don't want to submit a proposal, you don't even have to let us know, just don't submit a proposal. You also are obviously free to make changes from what you had originally had put in your NOI summary, because we anticipate that those changes will come as you start doing your research, and that research is going to inform and dictate the rest of what your proposal is. So we definitely expect changes and want you to be comfortable in getting that submission and now knowing that you can make changes. So there's another question that came in the chat. This is from Maddie. Hello, our question is whether we can have an appendix for tables or figures in our paper. And if we have an acknowledgement section, is this included in our 5 to 7 page limit?
Do you want to take that, Stephen?
Sure. And I'm pretty sure in our guidelines, there is a portion that mentions appendices or calculations and otherwise, and those would not be counting towards the 5 to 7 page limit. I would be careful, right? You don't want to put something in the appendices that would completely be adding on to the 5 to 7 pages, but calculations and acknowledgments would not count towards your 5 to 7 pages.
Yes, and to tack on to what Stephen is saying, 5 to 7 pages is the judged content of your technical paper. So we highly recommend not putting anything in your appendices or in your acknowledgments that is relevant to your design or to your proposal. That is not required to be judged. And as Stephen said, we're recommending being very careful not to extend your paper by adding the appendices to it. Now, Stephen, I have another. I wanted to see if I could get you to highlight something that we talked about in the Q&A last time. There were a lot of questions about what technical aspects teams should focus on in their airport design within that 5 to 7 page limit. And you said several times over that the design choices are up to the teams. I was hoping that maybe you can elaborate on that for anyone who might be new to this call.
Sure, and I guess I kind of alluded to some of it in my previous question, but a lot of what your design choices or airport or technologies will look like for the 2050s timeframe in your paper will depend on your own research. A lot of people right now, you can look at 10 different papers for aviation and find 10 different pictures of what the 2050s might look like technology-wise, infrastructure-wise, even down to the type of vehicle, the shape of the airplane, and the fuels used in those airplanes. So we're really leaving it up to the students to decide based on their research, kind of the picture that they're painting and them justifying that painting for us for the 2050s, and then saying what technologies are going to enable that future.
Great, thank you for elaborating on that. And yes, the bottom line is painting the picture of the future, and then you know, establishing what that design is going to look like and justifying it. We did have one question that came in that Stephen, that kind of goes back to the question about how to format the paper. It's, you know, would you like to see endnotes or footnotes within the 5 to 7 pages? And Stacy, chime in if you'd like, but generally speaking, I think the consensus is that the paper, those can be endnotes, not necessarily footnotes. Is that correct?
If that was me, that is exactly how I would do it, because I'd want every square inch of space available in that 5 to 7 pages to be able to use for useful information to the judges. Stephen, what are your thoughts?
If there's something that you feel that's needed, right, that I'm sure that space is available to you. You know, I know I personally, as someone who's reading a paper, you don't want to have to jump constantly back and forth between two spots but you know, sometimes I know when I'm curious where a piece of information is from, I might look to see, you know, what that reference is or where the information is from.
Great. And Michael, hopefully that answered your question. If not, please clarify. Stephen, one other thing that was touched on in the November Q&A that I thought maybe you could touch on again is the vision for the infographic. What would be an attractive informational infographic for the judges to review?
Sure. So the infographic is really not supposed to be overly technical, right? The technologies talked about obviously are technical things inherently, but the purpose of an infographic is to be able to communicate your ideas from your 5 to 7 page paper about the 2050s aviation technologies and what the airport is going to be like, is going to need to be like to enable those technologies, and what those technologies will enable themselves. You have to communicate that in a way that people who aren't already informed about aviation will understand. And so the infographic does have information on it, but the graphic part is obviously the kind of the main component. And so you want it to be visually appealing, but still have a little bit of text that gets the important information across to the viewer.
Great. Thank you. I think that'll be helpful for teams as they move forward. And yeah, just to highlight that, yeah, I think the goal of this would be to have the infographic stand on its own and be as informative as possible about the design on hand.
Yeah, and feel free to be creative with the infographic, right? There's not one right way to do the infographics. You can Google infographics and get a million different things. Some people use different aspect ratios, or as far as how they plan out their page. Some people might want to put, you know, a picture of the airport they design. Some people might want to put a timeline or tell some sort of story visually about the green aviation technologies or the aviation planes of the future. So.
And to emphasize, this is a little bit different than an actual poster. So, and the infographic is very specific because it is an infographic as opposed to an informational poster. So keep that in mind as you're making your designs.
Definitely encourage people who are used to doing the more standard kind of trifold research posters to definitely Google infographics to get an idea of, you know, what we might mean by infographic. It's definitely a lot like I said, more visually and graphic heavy than it is text heavy.
Perfect. Well, if anyone has any more questions, please feel free to raise your hand or type them into the chat. I do have one other question that I'm going to pitch to Stephen. And then if there are no other questions, then we will look to wrap up. I'll give Stephen a chance to make any other comments that might be important to go over before we do wrap up. But Stephen, one other question that as I was looking through the November Q&A that jumped out to me that teams might want to revisit is if there's any budget that should be considered when designing the airport.
Sure, yeah, and we're not asking for to propose a budget, because that could be a project in itself about what those costs would be. I would say try to be reasonable about what you think would be reasonably accomplished by even a proposed, budget. Obviously, things do change in costs over time, right? So some electronics or certain technologies now might cost a lot more than they will in the future, or they might cost a lot, less now than they might in the future based on, what happens with the world that we're in. So, I would definitely try to use your best common sense and judgment about, what might be reasonable as far as an airport goes, right? Look at kind of what airports are today, maybe how they might need to change to accommodate the technologies or new emerging markets that you're seeing in the future, and see how that might be incorporated in a reasonable way, right? I'm sure we've all seen designs for all sorts of things come out where you're said, oh, that might be a little over-engineered, or I don't know who's paying for that. And I think it's pretty easy to tell for some of those items when it's happening.
Perfect. Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat. And I don't know, Stacy, you haven't seen any raised hands, have you? Okay. Well, like I said, I wanted to give it over to Stephen to make any additional comments.
Sure, and I do see a question in the chat I'll answer in a second. I did want to reemphasize that definitely take a look at the guidelines. It not only says the kinds of things that we're looking for, but also the things that we're not looking for. And I don't want anyone to do specific research or waste page space on things that we don't want to see. Some of those things, right? We're not really worried about how people are arriving from ground transportation to the airport. We're not worried about airspace operations. We're really more interested on the climate-friendly aviation technologies, how those fit into the airplanes, or how those airplane integrations will change the airport and the new emerging markets, etc. So definitely consider those things when you're deciding what to put in and what not to put in. But I do see a question from Maxwell in the chat. It says, are there any examples for what our video should look like? Something along the lines of a TED Talk, a short YouTube video. So if I recall correctly, your video is very short. I think it's 2 minutes, right? And so you really don't have a lot of time to say what you want to say. So definitely take that into consideration, right? It's more of an elevator pitch, I think. I don't have an example video to link to. Janice, you all might have some examples from previous competitions for different things about what maybe what a 2-minute video would look like. But definitely feel free to make it unique to your group, right? So you might show your team, you might show your visualization of what you're working on, you might be talking about what you're working on, and summarizing it in a way that gets your point across within the allotted time frame.
Yes, and to your point, Stephen, we do have some videos that we can link to. So Maxwell and anyone else who's interested in this particular question, when we post the summary of this particular Q&A, we can put a couple of sample videos. And it looks like Stacy might be pulling something to put in the chat too. So we'll have 2 places that you can look at some sample videos from some other projects.
And I do just want to clarify that the examples that we're going to provide you are for challenges that are much more technically in depth. And students actually have a little bit longer, about a full year, 12 months to work on these particular programs. And so they're going to be a little bit more technically in depth, and just take that into consideration that we're not expecting that level, but it just gives you an idea of the types of things that people have put together to really just kind of showcase or augment a particular piece of their proposed concept. So for instance, you might try to explain verbally what your design looks like, and without having put a full picture together, maybe there is some sort of a CAD design that could be looked at from different angles in your like an animated version of that in your video. Or there's lots of different ways that students have showcased things that just in a video format can be a little bit more easily understood. Now, the good thing is for this particular challenge, you guys are putting together that full infographic. So we will be able to see a pretty cool visual image with your proposal submission. But if you feel that, there's anything that you can do to kind of augment or explain better, more visually, something in your proposal, that's what we want the videos to showcase. And we also just really would like to kind of see the faces behind the folks who have done all of the hard work. So that's why we've asked for photos, or to have the different team members included in the video, because you guys have put a lot of work into this, and we want to recognize that and just be able to see you and celebrate that with you as well. It's really fun for the judges to be able to see who's behind some of the proposals.
Absolutely. It'll be a fun project. And we really, really, really look forward to seeing what everyone has. As we've talked about here, it is it's an open competition, and the future is unknown. So we're very much looking forward to seeing what your research points to as far as 2050's airport, and what the technologies are going to be needed in there. Stephen, is there anything else that's on your mind that you think would be very important to add?
Not that I can think of at the moment, but definitely reach out to the email if you have any questions, and we'll do our best to get back to you.
Well, if there's no more questions, going once, going twice. We've mentioned the Blue Skies at nianet.org email address a few times. We are always at your beck and call if there are questions, and we'll answer them if we can. And if we can't, we'll get them over to our NASA sponsors so that they can make sure that they're answered. And I think I see, oh, yep, Stacy's putting some video samples in the chat. And then, like I said, we will also be posting those on the frequently asked questions page, along with a summary of all the different questions that were asked on this call. Like we said before, we look forward to that March 3rd submission date. Your technical papers, infographics, and videos will be available for judging, and we'll be announcing the finalists on April 7th. So thank you all for joining us today, and we wish you the best of luck as you proceed down this path over the next month-ish, and as you wait for the judges' review. So good luck, and we'll see you in June if you're selected as a finalist.